Thank you very much indeed. We've already been called a Standard East Tribute Act already tonight, so you know, we see the army. And like all tribute acts, we'll kind of do some of the same material, but you'll wish you were watching the real thing. So we'll go for it.
Okay, well, right. Me and Rick don't know each other that well, and we've kind of bumped into each other over a long period of time, but when we started talking about what we're going to talk about this evening, it occurred to us quite quickly that this image sprang to mind, and
I thought we'd read Starsky and Hutch. Like,
yeah,
just
so this evening could be a little bit of a moan about some things that we seem to kind of come together on, and so we have a bit of an apology in a way, a bit of a disclaimer before we get into it properly that I think Rick's going to read.
We hereby state, without any agenda, misunderstanding, or otherwise, that the views expressed this evening are uncorroborated by research, science, or proven facts, that anything we express this evening is merely and wholly based on our own personal / combined experiences to date. And while we largely agree with each other, we also acknowledge that we may be, albeit coincidentally / supernaturally misguided / deluded in our views. Okay. Yeah. So
this could be bollocks, basically.
That's from the heart.
I don't know if anyone's familiar with this thing. This is the bell curve, and it's used, often it's used to describe groups of people. And for the purpose of this evening, we're going to use it to represent the industry in which we work, which is the design industry. And it's kind of made up of a really big group of people in the middle that are the people like us. We're very much in the middle, that are probably not particularly well known, beavering away, doing work. But on the periphery, either side, there are the people that stand out in the industry, and that's always kind of happened. That's been it's been like that for a long time. You know, they're the kind of people with the loudest voices, or the people that kind of have the greatest insight and therefore kind of make a bit of a name for themselves. And the kind of famous people and the stars of the industry, they all kind of live in these little areas where the rest of us are in the middle there. And we're going to talk a little bit about the relationship and the effects that those people on the periphery have on everyone else in the middle there. When I was thinking about this recently, and I was thinking, actually, being in the middle doesn't sound that great. It's kind of you might kind of associate the middle ground with kind of average and mediocre and stuff like that. And so in my experience, hasn't been that. Although it's very much where and I think the same for Rick, where we've kind of worked. The middle ground is actually really exciting. It's not mediocre and average. It's where the kind of big ideas are kind of put into practice, really. It's actually a really great place to be working, but it's not celebrated very often.
Yeah, we're not representing anything else here tonight other than our own personal experience in the design industry and how that relates to this idea of the middle. Certainly in my early career, I would have been in danger of dropping off the other end of that curve, because I went out of education into what you could call a sweatshop as far as design was concerned. It wasn't a supportive environment. Design wasn't valued, and it just wasn't great. But I was lucky. I kind of got back and through a couple of breaks got back into very much the middle ground, and I'd be a proud resident of that, I guess. And as Richard says, it's not negative. It doesn't represent mediocrity or low value or low standards or just average stuff. But that's where most of the work is in the industry. So that's where we're coming from. And actually, clearly this isn't unique to the design industry. That the middle is everywhere. This is a building in Donegal Pass in Belfast, and I don't want to insult anybody who might be from around those there parts, but it's not the most salubrious part of the city. But I walk down there quite often because I work near it. And in the middle of it is this building, which is by some standards, unremarkable. It doesn't. I would have a guess that the architects who designed that maybe didn't win any awards for it. I don't know. I can't be sure. But it sits there in the middle of Donegal Pass, and it just kind of raises the area slightly. And I just like it. I think it's a great example of what you could turn the middle ground of the architectural world. Because I think sometimes we see architects as being all kind of superstars or a much more valued profession than design, maybe. But there's a middle ground in architecture as well. And it's represented by buildings like this that are maybe slightly better than they needed to be, but actually raise the standards of their surroundings.
Right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the relationship between these outer and inner zones, and I don't know if anyone's read the manual, volume 2 of the manual. The last bit is by Josh Brewer, and he touches on something about the demise of the celebrity designer. I thought this is kind of relevant here. I'm really sorry about this image, because this is like it's kind of the worst, cheesiest example of the celebrity designer. But in some ways I thought that was kind of what made it the best image in a way, because I think probably the demise of that character may be a good thing. And certainly the demise of this kind of character would be a good thing. But it's countered by what Josh Brewer described as being the rise of the team. I'm sure there's reasons for that. It's not just it's not a trend. It's just the nature of the kind of work that we do now. Kind of, you need to be more of a team to do the kind of work that we do now. Whereas not so long ago, I think certainly the idea of a kind of celebrity designer seemed kind of more a viable idea. So yeah, we kind of go from that to that now, and this seems like a good thing.
Yeah, we're both fans of teams and organisations. Oh, yeah. I've worked in organisations all my working life, and that doesn't mean that you lose your kind of profile or personality as a designer. You're actually working with a lot of other like-minded people, and if you're lucky, very talented people, all working towards the same goal, and you can achieve great things in that environment and in that culture.
Lost on track for a second, then I'm back on track now. What we were thinking about was actually that in a way, the idea of the individual celebrity designer, yeah, maybe on the wane, but there's something else that's kind of coming up, and it's a more kind of it's not necessarily a designer. It's I thought at the time it's like an opinionated protagonist, someone who's championing a particular thing, a particular trend, or a particular technique or principle. And I think they're the people that are having a similar effect on us that the celebrity designer might have, in that they can make big sweeping statements about things that have an effect on us, the people that are operating in the middle there, and that's kind of that thing we were talking about. I mentioned earlier about the relationship between these two people. That with this kind of, in a way, with the fame and the notoriety comes this kind of, with the power, then there's obviously kind of this responsibility. And we've seen, this is where we're starting to sort of moan a bit here. We've seen some things happen where people who are very well respected, have great insight into what they're doing, are fueling us, fueling what we're doing, or are perhaps occasionally forgetting themselves and saying something that might undermine how we feel. As Rick said, this is how we're talking from our own personal experiences here. So how someone may say something in a really big way, very publicly, but to us that may feel like, I don't know if I quite agree with that, or that makes me feel that what I'm doing here is really crap. And I think there's kind of, it's a bit of a shame that kind of thing happens.
Yeah. There's a theme that came up at Build on a couple of different years, actually, on a Build conference, if anybody was there. Last year, the Standardistas, Nick and Chris were talking about the idea of the journeyman, and the old idea that you started as an apprentice and you learned the trade and you learned the craft by coming into contact with various mentors who were masters of the craft, and you went on a journey and learned your trade or your craft over time. And that involved mentors in a major way. And they also referenced Ryan Sims, who in a previous build had talked about the idea of online mentors and the fact that if you don't have any in your career or in your working life, you can go online and you can find people who nurture you or help you grow. Well, certainly in the early years of my career, I didn't have the internet available because it was some time ago. But if I had done, I would have gone online and I would have identified a number of mentors, but maybe what I would have seen or read wouldn't have been as supportive as perhaps it could have been, because we do a lot of talking in the design community, particularly online, and it's not all nurturing. It's not all positive, because we're all human, and we say things in the spur of the moment that maybe aren't designed to be long-term thoughts, but they linger, because as we know, the web never forgets. So I'd like to look at a couple of statements that we're not going to talk about individuals here. We're not going to name names. We're hating the game, not the player. But there are quotes that you may recognize, you may not recognize, but these are the kind of things we're talking about which don't really make a positive contribution to the community. I can tell you afterwards who said these if you really want. You can only work with people you like. Now, there's a common theme with a lot of these statements, and that is that there's kind of an element of truth about them that makes them believable and kind of makes them more credible. But they are just opinions from certain people, in the same way that everything we're saying tonight are just our opinions, and you're free to believe them or not. But you can only work with people you like. It's kind of it's just one of those things that get picked up, and actually, in our experience, you can work with people you don't like. You can have a problem maybe morally or whatever with certain pieces of work you're asked to do, and it's your choice whether you carry them out or not. But you can work with people that you don't necessarily like. You can create effective work with those people. You're not life buddies. You can produce good work. So grand sweeping statements like that kind of gain traction, but they're not necessarily true.
I suppose it's true that not everyone has the choice, apart from, especially if you're employed. In a way, this is partly where this way of thinking, this stream of thought came from, is if you're employed by somebody, you don't necessarily get to choose who you have to work with, and your boss might really love the client, but you actually don't get on with them. But if you're in that sort of situation and you come across a statement like this from someone who you might admire and someone who you might look up to, then that's kind of really unhelpful, I think. As a statement that's kind of like, it's going to make you feel a bit crap, really, about your situation.
Okay, this is reasonably recent. A designer who does not write markup in CSS is not designing for the web, but drawing pictures. Now again, these are what we call absolutisms. They're presented as take them or leave them statements, but if you leave them, then you're wrong. There's an element of truth about them. Does it make sense for designers to get closer technically to the work that is ultimately produced from what they output? Well, yeah, that's a good thing. That's a good thing to support. But again, the common theme about all of these quotes is that they're lacking any context. What about if you work in an organization alongside maybe a front-end developer or developers in general who really get what you're talking about? You have a great rapport with them. You can communicate with them in a common language, maybe CSS or whatever, that allows you to achieve effective results. Well, that's okay too. And it really is about context, and it really is about results, and that's something we'll come back to.
This one, I heard this one a few years ago, and I can speak from experience actually, because I set type by hand, and it doesn't help me set type on my Mac at all. And it's a beautiful thing to have to do. I love letterpress. I love type. I've got a garage with tons of stuff in it, and I've got a little printing press. But I do think this was said actually in that context of you can't understand. It was in the context of thinking about type on the web, and I kind of thought that was a really unhelpful statement, because a lot of people will hear that and not have access to the facilities to type by hand. So does that mean that they aren't very good at what they do? The ridiculous thing about the statement is actually you can control type to a much finer degree on a computer than you can setting it by hand. So I actually was quite mad about that when I first heard it. I heard it live as well, so unhelpful.
Today, anything that's fixed and unresponsive isn't web design, it's something else. You're not a web designer, you're something else. Responsive web design, for those who aren't from a web design background or just don't know what it is, it's gaining a lot of momentum on the web, and it's the idea of a website responding to the device that you're viewing it on, and just presenting a different version of the website from a single code base, etc., etc. And again, the reason I think this is unhelpful is that, that this something else bit. What exactly? It's something else. You're something else. Is it meant to be, something better? I don't think so. It's meant to be derogatory, and it's creating a division, and it's saying you're this or you're that, and that isn't particularly good. Now, there are a lot of strong feelings about new things that or new techniques and new processes. So fine, let's all get excited about it, but I find that kind of polarizing statement just unhelpful. And it's actually foolish to talk in absolutes about something like the web, which is constantly changing. Yes, there are fundamental principles which apply, but things are changing all the time. So to talk in absolutes in that context just seems, unwise.
This one, we almost took this one out because it's very recent. In fact, it was last week, and the person who said it is brilliant. And a lot of people, you know who this person is. You may not recognise the quote. I'm not going to say his name out loud, because the guy's brilliant and he's inspiring, and he says fantastic things. And then he said this on Twitter last week. And there's one word wrong with it, and it's that word obnoxious. Because again, like Rick said, this takes this statement that could be constructive criticism into the realm of something completely different. It's like, this is, if I was I'm going to say a young graphic designer, but actually, if I read that, if I put a next link in my portfolio, I'd be thinking, I'm really crap. And that's why that sort of thing is unhelpful. And it comes back to that idea of, if you know people look to you for inspiration and for guidance, and then you have a responsibility to say things in a proper grown-up way, actually, because that's the problem with a statement like that, is it's not really a very adult way of saying it, and especially saying it in a somewhere like on Twitter, where actually there is no sense of context at all. It's a bit of a shame, but like I said, we almost took it out because I don't know how Rick feels about the guy, but I really admire the guy. He is brilliant, but in some ways that makes it a good example, because we can all say stupid things in the moment and not think about it. But if we're kind of a figurehead that people look to, then you have to we need to be a little more careful about. You need to be a bit more careful about how you say things.
Yeah, I think we should emphasise that pretty much everybody who came out with those statements we admire and we respect, and that has meant that we're not making
that just makes them even more powerful in a negative. Their negativity is more powerful. If it's somebody you admire, then you hear them say a statement that actually has a cutting effect on what you're doing. That's unfortunate.
Bubbles, Richard?
Yeah, bubbles. And I suppose that's what brought us our train of thought to thinking, well, how do these things happen? Is because we all operate in little bubbles, and we all have an idea of how the world is, but it's really only relative to our own experiences and where we are, and that's kind of what's happening here. The people we're referencing are saying things in a certain context, but expressing them in a wider context that has a kind of a ripple effect. Kept thinking that a lot of the things that we're talking about, they have a ripple effect. That like the new techniques that come out, they're often championed by people who are famous, who have a following in a way, and they're taken up by other people, and particularly the middle ground. In a way, that's what I was talking earlier about. The importance, actually, of the middle ground. I think I'm jumping ahead of the presentation here. I'm probably going to repeat myself later. But it's why the middle ground is really important, why the areas that we work in, we feel are really important. Because it's in this area that these innovations and new things that we're able to do are applied to real life things. So it's kind of where they really have an effect, really.
And we can come back to that.
Yeah.
But the idea of bubbles is that you have your own personal experience and you judge everything based on that experience. And there's actually something that David Hughes from Front said when I believe he was talking at Refresh a couple of years back. And I don't want to embarrass David at all, but it was just a good thing to say. I thought it was a helpful thing to say. And he said something along the lines of, and forgive me, David, if you're in for paraphrasing you, when you look at other websites that other people have designed, keep an open mind about them and don't be too judgmental, because you don't know exactly what went into them. You don't know the budget that went into them. You don't know the background in terms of who was involved. And to that I would add, don't judge someone else's process or techniques until you know the results that produced. And taking it as a whole, it's, just don't be judgmental, because it's all about context and it's all about that particular moment in time and the circumstances that led to personal design or to a particular design. So it's the use of language, I guess, we're talking about here, and bear in mind that it is all about your own personal context.
Actually, what I should have said was that really about the it was
what he said.
Yeah, it was something else as well, and it was about you made these sweeping statements. Who knows what unforeseen circumstances come to bear on somebody else's situation, that you can make a massive sweeping statement about this is how this should be done, but that person over there, his set of circumstances are so different that I don't think there are a lot of things that you can't be certain of, that and the things that a designer has to deal with to do whatever he has to do.
Okay, so we should recognise the differences between us and recognise other people's circumstances, the context of different things. And actually going back to the earlier theme of the kind of outliers or the people at the vanguard of the industry, as innovation comes to play and as new thinking comes into play, it doesn't actually take hold until the middle ground of the industry starts to support it and starts to implement it, at what you can call the coal face. It has to be supported by the mainstream for it to work and for it to become common practice. And the language of absolutism really doesn't have a place or a role to play in that. That's a quote from an essay that Jeffrey Zeldman wrote maybe 10 years ago. It's still a great read. I think Adobe hosted it. But that particular quote I thought was great, because that whole idea of it's this or it's that, I found it interesting that he used the word cool, because I'm terrified of cool, because I don't think that anything I've ever done is necessarily cool. And I try not to use that as a measure of any sort. And actually, cool isn't an end in itself. It's not something to pursue. If something's effective and it's successful, cool will be a byproduct of it. And I think that's probably what Zellman was trying to get at. I think. Yeah. Let's go with that.
You know, I've only ever worked for clients. I've never worked for myself. I've never made something. You know, I've never made an app or. I think there can be a sense that when you're only ever working for clients, that you perhaps, this is another problem of being in the middle, that there's something not quite as good about what you're doing. That you know, the holy grail for a designer is to find an outlet that they are in total control of, that they are making stuff for themselves, and hopefully are able to sell that and make a living out of that somehow. And I think that's brilliant. I think that's fantastic. And I think if you have an idea that you can that can take that kind of route, is fantastic. I understand how exciting that is. And what I'm about to say has got nothing to do with what I think about that. I think that is a great thing. But at the same time, working for clients is actually a great thing. I know. Again, I've heard the idea expressed that you know, the idea of working with clients is always a problem, and you've always got to kind of bend and flex to suit them. That hasn't really been my experience, really. I actually think the opposite. I think I get very excited whenever I meet a new client, and I always find it quite interesting what they're doing. And the more I think about working for a client, the more I think it has a bigger and bigger importance. And I suppose, you know, in one respect, when you're working for a client, you get to know them, you work through their problems, you empathise with them if you're doing your job properly, you kind of understand what their issues are, and hopefully you find a way to do something that will benefit their business. But it's bigger than that, really. It's much bigger than that. If you think that if you benefit someone's business, their business becomes more stable. It means everyone that they work for is more secure in their job. That means they're contributing better to the economy. Again, it's a ripple effect, really. That my role. We're talking from our experience. My role as a designer in the middle, working for clients, working for some really potentially dull clients, people that make, I think I've referenced it before, people that make UPVC guttering, or an engineering company that make a product that's not really that exciting, but actually, if you're able to do something that benefits their business, it has a ripple effect, a really positive ripple effect, and we can't all go off and do our own thing. We can't all make our own products, and partly because we're not all, clever enough to do that, and I certainly am not. We need to see the value in what we do, and it kind of comes down to the small things. I think that you can make a small difference. Actually, can have quite a big ripple effect out into the world, really.
Yeah, and we should really celebrate that more. We spoke earlier about the majority of the work in the design industry being in this middle ground that isn't going to make headlines, it isn't going to win awards of any sort, but it's effective. And as Richard said there, you want to make a difference for your clients. That's why clients hire you. That's why you are a professional, and you're seen as a professional. Wilson Minor. Bit dangerous referencing Wilson Minor in the middle of a talk, given that he gave one of the best conference speeches ever, but he made the point about just making small dents in the universe. Everybody's thinking about Wilson Minor now. Everybody's going, that was really good. He talked about making small dents in the universe, and I don't think we should worry how small, and actually it's the small projects where you get the biggest opportunity to make a difference, and you can turn any project into something exceptional. And whatever stage of your career you're at, whether you're in education, whether you're a graduate, whether you've been around a while, you're only ever one project away from being exceptional. you can put all of your learning and all of your experience to use and create something exceptional, which may go unnoticed by the majority of the industry. But that's not the point.
I was trying to think of the dullest piece of design that I love, and this is it. So I'm going to bore you with my Friday night at home. We love brown rice in our house, but I can't cook it. What I do is I put the rice in a pan, and I put water in it, and I put a heat under it, and it either boils over and makes a real mess, or it just doesn't boil. If I leave it, that's what happens. If I get it, I think I get the boil just right, and I'll go away, and I'll come back, and it'll either be not moving, or it'll be spewing out all over my cooker, and it's a nightmare. And then I discovered this little thing, and I hook this onto the edge of my pan, and I put my lid on, and I put the heat on at the lowest heat, and I can go away for 25 minutes, and when I come back, my rice will be cooked perfectly, so I can go and have a bath on a Friday night. It's lovely. So I love this. I love it so much that if it's not where it normally is, I panic, and I go searching around the house trying to find it, and I even look for it when I don't need it, which is ridiculous. But I just thought that's a really good example of something that, it's really dull. I don't know who designed it, whether it was really ever properly designed. They've probably been around for years. But what I thought was quite good about it, and this is kind of, again, a ripple effect, that isn't just something that holds my pan lid up a little bit. That is actually something that allows me to go and cook the rest of the thing that I'm cooking. It allows me to go and have a bath. It allows me to go and talk to my wife. It gives me all these other things, and it's that I couldn't have. I didn't have before I had this. Before I had this, I stood over the stove and watched my rice for 25 minutes. So I thought that was kind of a good example of a piece of design. I was quite keen to find something that wasn't too graphic design. A good piece of design. It's tiny, really dull, but actually has a big effect. Certainly has a big effect on my Friday nights.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah,
Just the point we made earlier about the middle being this kind of hive of activity, and it's not about the average or the dull or the mediocre. Actually, the average standard of design overall is pushed up by the middle ground, by the mainstream. Because we talked there about innovations and new thinking has to be implemented in the mainstream for it to really work. And it's the mainstream of the industry, as I say, that raises over time the average standard and produces things like this, which as Richard said, goes uncelebrated, but it matters to him, and it probably matters to a large number of other people as well.
Housewives throughout the land.
Yeah. So going back to the theme of just absolutism and opinion presented as truisms, no one has a monopoly on being right. No one individual experience in the design industry makes everything right or changes everything. Collectively, we change things. And best practice, for instance, is brought together by the actions of many. It's not introduced by one person and that's it. It's adopted from thereafter. It's actually the many who support it that make it best practice. And outlying technologies eventually become mainstream because they're supported. We actually have nothing to say about this slide. We nearly dropped it, but we just think it's great. Yeah, it's great. It's great. So, the question is, how should we really measure our efforts? How should we measure our work?
Again, we desperately trying to find an image that was quite cool for measuring. We were looking at things like too many obvious things, and then Rick came up with Spock and his thing that he uses to measure.
Tricorder.
His tricorder. So that's the only reason I say it. But it was really funny. Was actually we found that, and then we thought, wouldn't it be great to put a Spock quote into the presentation? And there were loads of really great Spock quotes that were really.
Probably say 8 people.
Yeah, that were really worked in some context in what we wanted to talk about. But the idea was like, how do we measure the value of what we do, is it important to be famous, or is it important to actually have an effect on people's lives? And what kind of effect should that be? Should it be big or should it be small? And I think, thinking about what Wilson Minor said, actually, the fact that the small things we do can actually have a much bigger effect than we may ever kind of imagine. To individual people, individuals, like my little metal thing, makes a big difference in my life.
Yeah, so chasing opinion or chasing kind of peer recognition or approval is actually counterproductive, and it's kind of wasteful. You don't have to be in the design industry for too long before you hear the spec design debate rear its head. For anyone who doesn't know, spec design is work that you're asked to do by a prospective client to show what you can do, to demonstrate what you would do for that particular job. One of the main reasons why it's seen as such a wasteful use of designers' time is that it's just that there are countless man hours poured into work that will never be used. Just one person will be picked, and the rest will all just go by the wayside. But actually, we do this to ourselves quite often in the design community. A provocative or inflammatory comment will be made on Twitter. It'll be replied to by a great number of people. There'll be blog posts that will be inspired by it, and again, it's trying to prove a point very often that can't be proved. It's just opinion, but it eats up so much of our time. And actually, this could all be replaced by more positive contributions. But you can't help getting caught up in it. If somebody says something you disagree with, or based on your own experience, isn't true, you get caught up, and suddenly you're in a fight. We wanted to show a picture of Jonathan Ive. For anyone who doesn't know, Jonathan Ive is Apple's lead product designer, or I think he's vice president of design, as far as I know. This is his picture on the Apple website, which is quite mesmeric. Don't look at the eyes. Don't look at the eyes. But his work, we all know as being the devices we use day in and day out. And I'll stick my neck out and suggest there's probably a lot of Apple hardware in the room tonight. We know his work. Now, his work has changed habits in quite large ways. Things like the iPod and iPad change the way you go about your day. So in a very large way, it reflects the effect that Richard's little pot thing has affected his life. But he is somebody who's well known, but the designer of that metal pot thing, not a great name, won't be known for. But it just so happens that Jonathan Ive is a lot higher profile. Now, the thing about Jonathan Ive is that we know very little about him. We know the results of his work, but we know nothing about his processes or his techniques. We just judge him based on his outputs, on the effective results of whatever process he goes through to make that happen. And also behind Jonathan Ive, you can be sure that there are countless other people and countless other teams who have to implement what Jonathan Ive comes up with in terms of ideas. But we should judge our work by effective results, because processes change, techniques will change, but principles will endure. So all of that other stuff that we talked about earlier, even responsive web design, whatever, it's principles that will endure, but everything else will change. Kittens. I think that about wraps it up. Yeah, we're kind of, yeah. You can't follow kittens. Yeah. So, thank you for listening, and I hope we've made some sense. But again, it's just our opinion. Thank you.